Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Vox Vomitus, otherwise known as Word Vomit. Sorry, I was already laughing before we went live. Thank you all for being here. I am your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, the award-winning author of Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, as well as the Hotel series. I am joined today, as always, by my two Vox Vomitus vixens, Trisha Mckee, author of the Beyond series, and Allison Martine, author of the Bourbon books. Our very special guest today is somebody who I have a huge girl crush on, and I've been fangirling for her for well over 10 years, Miss Sarah Langan. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm like so excited. This looks like it's going to be fun. You're not going to be like, go. You have an hour.
I know. We're like, what are you drinking, Sarah?
This is a 10-year-old Scotch, a Lefroy. What are you guys drinking?
I'm drinking a Irish whiskey called Writer's Tears.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine's an old fashioned, but I don't have any of my fun garnishes that make it look like fruit cocktail. It's just booze today.
Trisha's our designated.
Trisha, like it's 3. It's 3 o'clock.
It's 6 for Trisha and I.
Yeah, I'm just drinking soda.
Cheers.
Cheers. Trisha's here to make sure we don't get in too much trouble.
Yes.
He's our
designated
chaperone.
host.
That's helpful.
Our chaperone, like a chaperone. Ooh, I love it.
That's a really good idea.
I need one in just real life, apparently. So, Sarah, thank you so much for being here. You are here talking about your latest book, Good Neighbors. Can you give us and our audience a little rundown while we sip our cocktails?
So The Good Neighbors is about a family who are misfits and they don't belong in the place that they move to. And it opens there. But I'll give you some backstory, which is Gertie and Arlo Wilde fall madly in love. They both have really severe scarred pasts that they're trying to get over. And he is like tattooed sleeves and smokes and is an ex-junkie and had a hit song. And it's all gone now. And Gertie was a beauty queen who won some pageants and holds herself really like she's uptight and everything is for show. And women, they don't like that. And so she's sort of repellent to a certain amount of type of person. But what she's covering for is that her stepmother loaned her out to men and at a very young age. So she's trying to get over that. These are like huge things to try and get over. And they get an apartment in East New York and they have Julia and Larry. And they just decide like this is their life, is they just want to be parents and they just want to give their kids better than what they had. And they don't want their kids to fight like they had to fight. So they save up as much as they can and they buy into the American dream and they get this house in the suburbs. It's the most rundown. And they move in and they immediately don't belong because it's Long Island, because there's certain expectations of how the middle class is supposed to behave. And the other background for this is the near future. And it's when global warming is affecting us more. And the financial strain of that is particularly hitting the middle class in my vision. And I think that's realistic. So these neighbors are already stressed out. And the idea that someone is moving, it's like barbarians have shown up at the gates. And this means that their own children's futures are messed up. This means that maybe they're going to lose their houses. So they represent all kinds of things. And there is, because of this global warming, there is a sinkhole warning at the beginning of the novel where we know something's going to happen with, and it's in the park on the cul-de-sac where all the kids play. So the Wildes show up, they're not welcomed, and the next door neighbors, the Schroeders, take an interest in them. And Rhea Schroeder is the queen bee, and she is having problems of her own. And she's not a person who should be living in the suburbs. She's overeducated, she's underemployed, and she's not stimulated, and she's frustrated. And when she sees Gertie, she thinks, here's someone different. And here's someone that I can talk to and actually be friends with, as opposed to all these types that appear to me like Stepford or something, and their preoccupations are so mundane, it drives me crazy. I want to talk about real things. They quickly become friends, but something happens. And Rhea has her own past. And I don't know if anyone's ever had a fight with a best friend where it just gets you, or like something you guys were plugging in wrong and you were both doing wrong things some way. So what happens is they have this fight, this fracture takes place, and Rhea goes ballistic and tells all the neighbors everything that Gertie has confessed about Arlo's heroin, about her upbringing and her past, and and that maybe there's something wrong with them. And so when the story begins, there's a 4th of July party that the Wilds haven't been invited to, and they're hurt. But as they do, they decide, well, we're going to try and make this work anyway. We're going to go out. We're going to ask Rhea why she didn't invite us. We're going to make ourselves fit. And they're rejected when they do that. At the same time, a sinkhole opens in the middle of the park. And we see like what the relationships are. As the story progresses, about half the block moves away because the sinkhole is toxic. The half that stays there because of this dramatic thing that happens, which is one of the children falls down the sinkhole. And they want to make sure that that child is raised up and they feel invested in that. At the same time, they begin to think that maybe the Wilds have hurt that child who fell down the sinkhole. And maybe it's the Wilds' fault that all of this is happening. And they begin to scapegoat the Wilds, not only for the sinkhole, the child, but what's happening all around them. So
it's a feel-good story of the year, is what you're telling us.
Yes.
I want to kind of burst in and say how much I loved this book. First of all, it had such beautiful things to it symbolically that I just love so much. I love the idea of a female friendship breaking up and how it's really like losing your first love. And that is like the core of so many toxic female friendships and non-toxic female friendships. When you lose that bond, it is heartbreaking in a way that a lover can't break your heart.
Well, they got in closer. You know, I think the weirdest thing with women is we're not, a lot of us don't have access to our anger, and we're not able to express anger in our friendships in those same ways that we could with men. You can be angry with a man in a fight, have a fight and get over it. And it's much, much harder just because, you know, our gender was not raised to express these emotions. So they can build and they can be misdirected. And you can think that you're having a conversation about one thing, but you're having it about something 10 years ago. And it gets really ugly. And it's painful for that reason too, because they're like family.
They are. They're like closer than sisters even. Just so you handled all of that so beautifully. Also, I'm a theater nerd. I went to school for theater. So I saw a lot of not only the Crucible in this, but also a lot of Tennessee Williams, because Tennessee Williams plays are always in the summer. It's always hot. The heat is another character that brings people's temperaments to a boil. And I got that.
Oh, I love
in
that.
Good Neighbors. I was just like, this.
Am I hearing everyone? Are you hearing me?
Yes. Oh, hello.
You're
There
back.
you
Okay,
are.
good.
Sorry.
You're back.
Sorry. Something weird happened.
I was scared it was me.
No, I always have internet problems. So.
Well, and I'm going to hop in here. Lori Schoenfeld says, yes, I felt that too with women friendship.
I like the thing that I labored over most was Shelley and Julia, that long talk that they have, because that meant so much to me. Like my best friend I met when I was 10, and we were in love. You know, it was wonderful. You know, and there's just this wonder that happens.
Because it's such a, especially at the age of 10, it's such a wonderful, innocent way to explore emotions is with your first best friend, because you feel everything together. You fall in love with the same boys. You hate the same boys. Your moms are mean. Everybody's mean. You love everybody. You hate everybody. Your brothers are gross. And it's a magical time. So the book brought me back to my childhood a lot. I was the Julia. I was the poor kid in a rich town. And smoking cigarettes at the power lines with some kids that their parents had nicer jobs than mine did.
It always seems so crazy hypocritical to me. Like the parents who would get so worked up about stuff like that. Just
like, why is that girl wearing jeans?
Oh, in the town I grew up in, one of my friends wasn't allowed to wear jeans, and she would pack them in her backpack and change into them in the mornings. It was odd. It was so odd.
Aren't you from the town that you wrote Good Neighbors about? So.
Yeah. I mean, it's loosely based. It's not, I haven't lived there. I'm not 12 or 30 or 45, living there. So I don't know.
Very specific ages.
Yeah. Well, I mean, our memories of the 1980s, or you guys are probably the 90s and the aughts, are like,
No.
Well, so
thank you, Sarah.
But our memories of that are a conformist era, because it was a really conformist era, and because everyone different was looked at askance, and you weren't allowed to have different ideas. And I remember like bringing that Sting album Russians to my 6th grade class, and like some kids screaming like, "You like commies." And I was like, no, it's about nuclear war. No, you're not allowed to have any nuance. Like, you just are supposed to hate commies and love Rocky. So but
is that when you read the lyric, "I hope the Russians love their children too"? Like, can you just have the takeaway and go, please just listen to the song before you judge me?
Are you, it's like talking to a Trumper. Like, no.
You can say that here.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
No. You hope they come around, but I think
they don't. They never do.
To finish the thought, like I think that the era now that people are growing up in is more diverse, and there are more ideas out there. And the way that I'm raising my kids to be like feminists so I took them to go see Wonder Woman, and I got a little weepy at the battle scene. It was amazing. And we walked out, and the girls were like, why did she have that boyfriend? And he wasn't her friend. He was trying to take control. The only one we liked was Robin Wright, Yeah. And I was like, oh, because you don't have to live with the burdens that I was indoctrinated to. So I don't know. I think the eras have changed.
Well, they have. The joke is the princesses of our youth are the generals of our adulthood. So you watch Buttercup, the princess, become a general. We watch Princess Leia become General Organa. We're like, We're promoted ourselves to the head of the army now. We are not just going to be princesses to be rescued.
So Ruth Bader Ginsburg was interviewed. I may have this wrong, but I like it, so I'm going to repeat it. And they said, when is it going to be enough? When do you stop fighting for women on the Supreme Court? And she said, when the Supreme Court is all women.
Yeah,
for many years. And she was like, and I thought about it. It was like, yeah, because they had the lock on it for 200 years.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's been 200 years driven in that specific direction without any women. And she's right. It sounds radical and it's funny, but it's like, actually there's, we're not even going toward course correction. Mm-mm. We're not even at equal. So.
Especially when certain women are still mentally in that I am
internalized misogynist.
Well, and I wanted to bring up
you can say it.
I love the fact that when you chose to set it, both from a demographic and cultural point of view, but also from a storytelling point of view, that you set it in the future. Because I love the fact that so much of the story was told in the retrospective, where you'd give a little bit of a glimpse of this is what happened, and here are all the cultural things that are responding to this big event that happened. And then we're seeing, okay, well, why did she set it in the future? That was something I was kind of grasping with. And yes, the environmental thing is part of it, but also the fact that then the kids can be now as opposed to kids of the 80s or kids of the 90s. They are kids slightly in our future still, rather than kids set in the 70s and now looking back, or kids set in the 90s and looking back.
Yeah. I was avoiding that nostalgia. Like, I feel like that's been cashed in on too much. And I feel
Stranger
like
Things.
I think it's harmful. I do. I think it's like, oh, it was like this. And it's like, no, it wasn't.
Mhm.
And Cobra Kai, no. Like, Karate Kid was never like Karate Kid. And people don't beat each other up in the high school over, like, what? Like, that's not a thing. So, like, it's creating a reality that doesn't exist, to the point where people believe in the reality and react to the reality, and there's like meta levels. And I really was hoping and trying to make this as realistic children as I could. And it's funny because I keep talking about sexism, and it's like endless, and people are reading the book and they're like, I was a guy and I liked it and I felt, and I have my own interpretation of this, and they should. But I do. Yeah, I have a lot of.
I do want to make the point, because full disclosure, I didn't finish the book. I have started it. And you say about nostalgia and you wanted to avoid it, but it's there, but on a different level, because it's what we as the readers feel and remember of our own experience. It's not copying what culture tells us.
Yeah. That makes me happy, because it makes me remember, like, remember the Twin Peaks movie?
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. And
Firewalk.
when Laura Palmer, when it's apparent something really bad is happening to her, I remember just started crying in the theater, because I was thinking about this friend that I had, that I just knew I was losing her. I knew that she was going down a road. She wasn't going to let me help her. And that was it, and that like brought that out. And I would love, to evoke those real feelings.
Yes, it definitely has.
Yeah, I think I agree with Trisha. I felt nostalgic, but not in the same way that I feel like the nostalgia is being forced down my throat, like when I watch Stranger Things or things like that, where I'm like, oh God, no, not everybody was just like this lifestyle. This made me nostalgic, not for a time or a place, but for a sense of how I built relationships when I was younger.
Yeah.
And that was great.
I was talking to a friend today, because I have a friend who, from my past, who, anyway, like, how do you honor friends that you've had as an adult that are no longer in your life? And I was talking to my friend, and she's become a good friend since we moved to Los Angeles. But it's kind of a loaded question at the same time, because are we going to stay friends? You just constantly move through friends in adulthood. And she was like, I don't know how either. It's friends move it in and out of your life, and it feels disingenuous in some way. I don't know. I want to be friends with all these people that meant something to me, but they stack up, and you can't be a good friend to that many people.
Well, and you bring that up when you're exploring it through Rhea, where she's thinking, there are times when she's talking about things about not connecting and thinking that the people who are pretending to connect, that's all a falsehood, that no one really connects that way. And then later she comes to a point where she's more like, well, maybe I do want this. And she looks at Gertie as that person. And then when she finally gets vulnerable with Gertie, feels that rejection. And so seeing Rhea push through that and figuring out friendship and female friendship, and okay, maybe this isn't just a scam that other people try to sell you on, that it could be real. And then she finds, oh no, it's a scam because this person saw the real me and she doesn't want me. Sure, I'm blubbering drunk, but she doesn't want the real me. So I'm going to now decide to hate her entire family and break up a friendship between my daughter and her friend. And just the first domino goes plink, and everything goes very, very badly after that. That's not really spoiler, because that's the beginning, but still.
Oh yeah, it's totally the beginning. It's totally the beginning.
Yeah.
But I think so. I love Rhea, and I love that she has all these observations that are like, yeah, like a lot of what she says, she's just like, casts like a surgeon's knife on like every relationship and dynamic in the whole block, and they're all true and funny. They're just the meanest interpretation.
Yes.
But I also think like there's something to phoniness that she can't tolerate, you know, and those friendships, women and men do this with a lot of like hugging, especially in Los Angeles. And, oh, it's so good to see you. And you're like, oh my God, you're so fake. You know, you would like, if I got hit by a car, you'd keep walking because you were late for an appointment.
Wow.
You know?
At least you said appointment and not like late for like because they wanted to get a latte or something.
They have an appointment with a latte, Jen.
So I think that Rhea is like, this is all made up. Like, and the only person who wants to really be a real friend to me is Linda Audamanelli, who is
who is just so
silly. She's a silly human.
I was just like so sad. I loved Rhea so much because I felt like she would, in many ways, was very despicable, yes, but she was so New England to me, like so East Coast, that I was just, and that's where I'm from, that's where I live. So I know her, I know that person. I know the less extreme version of Rhea. I probably know the actual extreme version of Rhea too, but
hopefully not that one.
Yeah. I mean, I remember that kind of personality growing up. I remember like, parents with like cowbells outside their house. Did you have this? And they'd be like, it's time to come home. They're ringing the cowbell. Like, what are they, cattle? Like, it was so weird.
I still have, ours wasn't a cowbell, it was a brass bell, but I still have
You had it!
And it's in my house. I could get up and get it right now and show it to you. A couple years ago, I was ringing it, trying to get the cat to come in. And then I thought, what the F am I doing?
What have you done?
The cat is not going to come in if I ring a bell. The cat is going to hide.
Cats never come if you call them. They're
yeah, had the bell, like, and you could hear it throughout the neighborhood. When when the street lights came on, you'd hear people open their doors and just like ring bells, and the kids would just come like, okay, I guess it's time to stop playing at the power lines with no supervision.
Down by the story.
The 80s.
Yeah.
Back when
we
we
all
were
survived.
Yeah, well, most of us.
It's not just a women's story. There is like I think that a man's worst nightmare happens in this story, which is the accusation of sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Especially to my #new book boyfriend, Arlo.
Is he your new book boyfriend?
He had all the qualities I love. One hit song, lots of tattoos, damaged past.
I was just going to say, scarred past, you had me there.
You had me at scarred past and tattooed sleeves. And the name Arlo. I'm like, oh man.
I had to do some retooling of how I feel about the name Arlo, because one of my good friends, like 3-year-old, is Arlo. So
that's
it's not a toddler, it's a grown-up. It's okay. I don't think anyone had built Arlo before.
I was playing with binary. So for in the different incarnations of that book I had, his dad was Woody. And, you know, I was like constantly playing with like, so Rhea is the name of a Titan. And then I think there's another Titan name in there somewhere, because the Titans eat their children, the gods, and like Robert Benchley and Peter Benchley and
the Peter
like
Benchley.
I had it all, and now it's just like vestiges. You know.
Now, did you originally intend this to be, because you are a horror writer, and this I don't consider Good Neighbors a horror novel. A literary horror novel, perhaps, or personally horrific, but it's not a horror novel as like a typical horror novel. Did you ever think that something was going to come out of the sinkhole? And
oh yeah, it was initially a monster that came out of the sinkhole, and it was, you know, and it was a slasher. And then I was like, I just couldn't make it work. And I finally realized it was because the monster was competing with the human story. Because once you have a monster, you can't resolve these really. Can you imagine? Like, I could try, but it wouldn't. Like it's all these.
Would they have all
issues.
Bonded together to fight the monster? Like you can't.
And we've seen that.
And then what am I saying?
Then what are you saying? That you can get over your differences if there's something that's worse? That's not a good moral.
It's not new
You're
either.
just finding a new scapegoat, and that's really not any better, because that's where we started was this idea that, Sarah, you were saying that here you've got this whole community who's worried about losing their livelihood. And instead of embracing the new family who's finally made it to the point where they can also have the American dream, it's like, uh-oh, you're doing well. That must mean that I'm getting brought down. Even though there's nothing to show that, it would just be more scapegoating. I mean, I feel like there is a monster in there, and you do name it. I don't know if you want me to say what the monster is or the name that you give it, because it's kind of a spoiler. But the monster is named repeatedly, but the monster is not like,
oh, yes, I know.
Yeah. I mean, I think the question of is it horror is as keeps being posed to me, and I'll talk about a marketing perspective, which is like I had to be rebranded because my third books didn't sell as well, and I couldn't sell a horror novel. So okay, this and it's not. I didn't compromise anything about this book. I love this book. And writing this book was really hard for me because I had to figure out how to do something new, and it took a lot of work. Do I think it's horror? I do. But I think it's a woman's horror. And I think a lot of, I think so often these domestic stories are told in ways that alienate the people who run domestic life, and they don't tell those women's stories. And so it's kind of a paradox because I'm writing horror, but the horror's for women, but you guys read horror. Most women don't read horror. And if it's marketed as horror, they're not going to buy it, and they're not going to put it in their book clubs, and it's not going to reach them. And this is not cynical. I want them to read it because they're reading it and they're telling me I feel seen. Like I'm literally getting emails like that. I'm getting emails like I was crying, I felt this. And so yeah, it's horror. Yeah. Clearly it's like, Shirley Jackson, Jack Ketchum horror. I love Jack. I miss him. I shouldn't even compare myself to him.
You can.
I miss him.
You can.
But I want to make sure that the people who I think I want to communicate with are getting it.
I love what you're saying so much. I know Allison also writes sci-fi. Trisha also writes sci-fi and horror. I'm a horror author. I write like grief horror and trauma horror, and it's always very emotional. And I know when I say I'm a horror writer, people are like, what kind of monster is it? And I'm like, it is your past memories. And they're just like,
yeah.
Oh.
But I completely hear what you're saying, Sarah, about trying to make sure there's no disconnect between what you're marketing it as and who the intended audience is based on some preconception of women don't like this or people won't like that. I know Jen mentioned I write sci-fi, and that whole genre where the line that gets really confusing, especially if you've got protagonists who are women. And I joke, I will be, when I publish sci-fi, I will be using my initials, my first two initials and my last name, because there are men who don't read sci-fi. But as soon as they pick up the book and see the primary characters are women, they're going to put it down anyway. But the point is, you don't want to have that initial reject based on something of women don't do horror, women don't read sci-fi, women shouldn't write horror, women shouldn't write sci-fi. But also getting into those humps of the book clubs and your audience being, oh, I don't read that really icky stuff, or aliens too. It's that you need to get into, because the Oprah book club set, they're your audience and they can connect, but they may be like, horror, no, pitch it to me in a way that I want it. Pitch it in a way that is acceptable to me.
Well, so my previous books, my high school friends, my college friends were like, it bothered me. I couldn't read it. And
that's why I.
Or did they just?
Yeah, no, it wasn't for them.
Or did they just decide because of the genre? Because I have friends who are reading my romances who are like, oh, I'll read these. I can't do the sci-fi. The book isn't out yet. They have no idea what it's about. They're already saying I can't.
Exactly. And so I was getting texts. I was getting questions. Can I read Good Neighbors? Would it be okay? And I was like, it's okay. You're going to be okay. It's going to work for you. And they did. And they were like, oh my God, I really loved it. It made me really happy. And so it's a name. And I'm like, name it whatever you want, if it's going to reach people, because that's what I want. I want people to read it.
It's a really good point, because for years I was like, I don't like sci-fi. I just don't like it. But I found myself watching when Star Trek was on, when my husband would have it on, and I'm like, oh, I love this episode. And I would be reading something, and they're like, you're reading about aliens. You're reading it. And once I accepted the fact that I absolutely love sci-fi and to venture into that, writing it, but it's trying to pull in an audience who is, raised to believe this is what you like. This is going to be promoted to other people, another gender.
Yes.
It's definitely, it's hard to break through at times.
As we were talking about in the green room, they're not wrong, because horror historically has not included women in its stories in believable ways. So like there's certain writers that if I had been given to read, to say like, do I like horror? It's like, there's a lot of rape, And no, I don't like horror. I never want to read it again.
There's also a lot of like weirdly horny women who are about to be killed by like a monster or something, who just decide to like have sex with the hero because they just like, that's really where your brain is when you're going through trauma, is like, we're just going to have this really sensual sex where my nipples look like, rivets on the Titanic or something like that.
Yeah. And like, I couldn't help it. I was still horny while being killed. Like,
right.
Yeah.
What?
I couldn't.
Like, and you want to write the letter to the guy and be like, where's an example in real life that you met a lady who had this happen?
I know.
Well, you don't because
so
she's
horny
dead.
about this. She's dead because she's dead.
They're all dead.
She's so happy.
But they changed and they became happy and they loved the guy so
They
much.
loved the guy. Oh God! Don't get me started on the like. I accidentally fell in love with the man who raped me because I had an orgasm during it.
Oh my God, that's like all the soap operas of the 80s.
Yes.
It's
Luke and Laura.
That's exactly.
I was going to say that oxytocin, it just like wipes your memory. So we've been watching stuff that's been going over the old Superman movies, and the number of times, I mean, I didn't really watch them growing up. I didn't know how many times Clark kisses Lois just to wipe her mind. And I'm just going, we gotta raise this?
Yeah,
like, why would you doing that? Why are we doing it? Why can't we just let them be happy? I mean, I guess you'd have to stop writing the story, but whatever.
At least it was Margot Kidder.
Yeah.
Margot Kidder.
You watch Margot Kidder do anything.
Yeah.
That's true. But then when she ends up, I think it was in the 90s that she was showing up in people's bushes and in the wrong home, you wonder if some stuff was actually done to the poor woman.
She was a method actor, so she probably
Reeve gave her schizophrenia.
Yeah, Christopher Reeve gave her enough reviews that she had a nervous breakdown because they went to the actor's studio in New York and knew they had to feel it and be it. We're gonna get hate mail.
Sorry.
Like Christopher Reeve did no such thing.
No, he did.
He did no
He
such
did
thing.
not. He did no such thing.
Margot Kidder, all good.
But I do like, so why, I think there's reasons women don't like horror. I think there's reasons that they're like, I don't want to be a part of this. And I think like my dad, when I was in high school, got me year's best fantasy and science fiction. No, fantasy and horror. And it was Terry Whitling and Ellen Datlow. And I was like, what is this? This is great. And it was all the horror that's for me, that wasn't like, educating women, training women, using them in some way. And it was sad they were murdered,
Grooming by books.
Yeah, grooming by books.
Yeah.
When I was little, I got transfixed into horror because I accidentally read Pet Sematary thinking it was about a cat. It was not.
That's
but I loved it. But then afterwards, my parents were like, these books are not for you. But at a flea market, they let me buy all these like Gothic romance and Gothic horror books, like all those like women just running from castles books. Because they were like, these are good. These are like, they're for like princesses or something. But most of them are legitimately just about like people that work at colleges who practice witchcraft on the side. And they're all like written in the 50s. And it's just about like women practicing witchcraft so their husbands can get promotions. And I'm like, is this better than me reading Pet Sematary?
Yeah, I was reading a lot of John Saul, which, when you're 10 or 11, is inappropriate.
It is inappropriate.
No one was
But-
monitoring you.
But those covers were so intriguing. You had to with like the glowy eyes.
Oh, they were at every 7-Eleven rack. I'd be like, I'll take that. I'll take that. And my 6th grade teacher was like, I'm giving you something else. This is too much. You can't be reading this. Because it was a gross one. It was a really gross one. It
What'd
was
she
stuff
give
for the
you?
children. And he gave me
It was so
Jealous
weird.
Lies by Sweet Valley High. Like whoever that is, Francine Pascal.
Yes.
And he was like, and I want you to tell me how that makes you feel instead. And I was like, it made me feel bored.
Dead inside.
Dead inside.
Jessica and Elizabeth were a perfect size 6 and they played tennis. This is what they eat for breakfast. And I was like,
Long hair.
I feel bad
blue
about
eyes.
myself. I feel
both
really
drive-
bad.
They both drive
Right there.
convertibles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry,
One's-
sir. This
One's
gave me
a
money.
jock, one's
Yeah.
the journalism captain. And you're like, I've
like,
never
I'm-
joined anything.
I'm not anything. I'm just pale and weird.
I don't even have a
John
twin,
Jones.
okay?
That's so true. Yeah.
It's true. It's so in 6th grade, we got to write a short story about anything we wanted, and I wrote Nightmare on Elm Street fan fiction as if Freddy Krueger and Nancy were falling in love, and my teacher
Oh my God.
legitimately just wrote the words "no" on it. I didn't even get a grade. It was just, no.
You got
And
it.
he had
Your grade was no.
I know. I was like,
Terrible.
and I said, "Do you want me to redo this?" And he said, "No." Like, no, I don't even want to know what your voice is going to be. And I'm like, huh.
That's terrible.
It's terrible.
That's really terrible. But the thing is, like, you're onto it because, like, it has always historically been like, so Hannibal Lecter kind of loves Clarice, and
Yeah.
Clarice kind of has the hots for Hannibal Lecter. And you're like, in real life, I don't know.
No.
Like, I don't think I would
like
have the
that you
hots
said,
for that
I
guy.
don't know, but you're like, I can't be 100% sure.
I don't know. Like, she never had a father, and there's all this, or stuff that
Exactly.
you could maybe, but like, he eats people.
He
So
eats people.
Yeah.
And
That's a terrible.
I believe like the Hannibal Lecter Will Graham murder husbands bromance much more than the Clarice Hannibal Lecter. If we're talking
Right.
about wingnut fan theories with like strange sexual chemistry.
yes.
I think I just broke the show. So it's like, yeah, that. I gotta go now. Nothing left to say.
Yeah.
You've been on a book tour for a while. Is this not your typical interview that you've had?
Oh, it's nice. You guys and the review crew were like a group, and
They're great.
we had fun. I mean, it's all been fun, but this doesn't feel as much like go sell some books. I'm
Sell
like,
us your
oh
book."
god. So
This is your
it's
shot.
nice.
Let's do
It's
it.
really nice. Yeah. But it's been good. It's been since I guess the book came out February 2nd. The first event was February 1st. So what were you gonna say?
I just said it was my birthday, so we were looking to see when it came out. I'm like, oh, this book is for me. It came out on my birthday, so I knew that was just special.
It was
for
a
me.
sign.
Yeah, the sign that was the day the book was released. That's it.
So are you working on anything now? Are you taking a brain break? How do you?
Well, this book I wrote a while ago, probably I think it's been a year and a half since they bought it. And which was great because they spent all that time they really worked. I mean, I've never had this happen before. It's like they were like, let us do all these things for you, and let's make these maps. They hired an artist to make the maps to work with me and who read the book, so they knew how it should look. Because I wanted it to be a cul-de-sac, but it doesn't work because the time it takes to run from the sinkhole to the houses isn't enough. So you have to make the bigger. I mean, there's all these details that they thought of.
Are
that
these things that just? Sorry to interrupt. Is this in the book in the hardcover version? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We listened to it. I think I don't know if all of us did.
I read it.
Oh, you guys
had it
did.
in
I
Audible.
read it. I read it
So-
with my eyeballs.
I know. I
Reading
kept
it.
asking Jen, every time I was writing a name, I was putting question marks by it because I don't actually know how anything is spelled. I'm like, question mark?
I should have told you there were maps.
This is like a
Wow.
map.
Yeah, it was like
And
Lord
they
of the
did that.
Rings.
Yeah. It's
Jen,
really
you're going to
cool.
take a picture of that and send it to me?
I will.
Thank you.
I'm like, I can do that.
And there's an evolution of what the sinkhole looks like and the stuff in it. And I mean, they just have been really, really crazy supportive. So I've written a pilot for a series for it, which would be a lot of fun.
Or a series for this?
Yeah, right.
I
that
would
would be
love
amazing.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, dream casting and go.
I'm Rhea.
No, you're not.
Okay, sorry.
I don't think I can even say it because we're actually talking about casting.
Oh,
So
okay, yeah.
Mm,
You,
Yeah.
you can just
Maybe
email it to
I
me.
tell you guys.
Later.
Well, sure.
Just tell me later. That is so exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, we'll see what happens. It's but things look good, which is great. And then I have an next book, and things look good there too. So that's exciting. It might be a little while, but I think that's good. Like a couple
It should
years,
be.
like 2 or something like that.
Yeah.
Between.
Not 10.
Oh God, that was so bad. It was terrible.
Sarah, I won't lie. Every time I would go to Amazon, I would just like look for a new book for yours for years. Just like,
Thank you.
When is it happening?
I was trying.
It was
So-
well worth the wait. Well worth the wait.
Thank you. Well, people would be like, "Do you still write?" And I'd be like, "Yes."
Like,
So-
nope, I'm just raising babies now.
I mean, like, it's a whole part of my personality. They gave me a lobotomy, and now I don't write. Like, I don't know what even that would mean. So,
Like, did that just mean you were just like home supporting John? Like, just like being like, just a cheerleader for him? Because you are part of a power couple. A
I
literary
don't know what it would mean. Yeah, like what was that question? I was never sure
Was
where
the
that
question,
was going.
what do you do all the time?
Yeah. What do you do all day?
that or like, do you even still want to write? Is this something you still want to do? Because they don't know the behind the scenes. They don't know like, hey,
Yeah.
this didn't work the way I wanted it to, and now everything's kind of derailed. But I was going to say earlier, it feels like in many ways this is a relaunching of your career as a new publisher and possibly even kind of different subgenres. Like we were talking about it being horror, but it's not only under horror. If you go to Amazon, it's like psychological thriller. Is that where it shows up too?
It was literary psychological fiction because I looked.
Yeah.
And a couple other things that I was like, oh, this is good. These are good categories.
It's nice. I mean, yeah, like there's like you're one of these a little bit or whatever that is where you're contentious because you're like horror's good and like
Yes.
I should be and I'm going to stick up for it, but at the same time it's like I want people to read it and they will read it and they will like it as long as it doesn't have that label attached to it.
It's
And
very
sometimes
true.
they just don't necessarily fit really squarely in some neat little box of it's just this or it's just this over here. So having it in a couple different boxes might mean it's open to a few more audiences who might not be interested in this box, but they're like, oh, but I like this box. I like that thriller idea.
That's always been the dilemma with my work, though. It's always been its own thing. And it's like, where do we put this? Where do we stock it?
I always called Audrey's Door architecture horror, and people were like, what does that even mean? And I'm like, you just have to read it. As an architecture nerd, I loved it.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
and the fake architecture movements.
People thought they were real. And I'd be like, no, I made it up. And they'd be like, no, it's a thing. It was a religion.
Google
I'm
it.
like, no, it was.
Google it.
No, I made it up. I was at the time that I read that I had gone back to school for art history and architecture history, and people in my classes were just like, this is real. I'm like, that is not real. We are going to school for this. It is not real. It's
That's amazing.
It's amazing.
That's always a
It's not
sign.
real.
But that's always a sign of a great author who creates something that seems so legit that everybody's like, I'm citing this. No, that is not a legitimate source. This is fiction, guys. It's like, she did her research. She made stuff up. Just embrace it. Go with it. I mean, I still joke. This is why I don't really understand how any of like Egyptian mythology works, because mine all comes through the lens of Anne Rice. And I'm like, wait a minute. Is this real? Well, in this one, Akasha goes and does that. That's not real. I'm like, well, Anne Rice says so. So Very
And
good.
this was amazing. I remember reading Lestat and being like, the people who read Lestat seem sad. I'm not ready. And then like I finally read it and was like, oh my God, this is crazy. And it's like the vampires slowly turn to stone, don't they? Like, and they get. I was like,
I mean,
this is
they
so
do.
cool. Yeah, yeah.
Vampires slowly turn to stone. Yes.
I mean, this is a different kind of cannibalism because that's just like blood and just like a couple little bites. It's totally different. We're not doing that cannibal. Sorry, that's me.
Oh my gosh. I hate to cut this short because we're having such a good time, but I'm almost out of a beverage and we are out of time, which is the saddest part. Sarah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
For drinking with us and chatting with us, and you were great. Thank you, Vox Vomitus Vixens, as always. I love you both. Thank you to everybody who watched us live and who is listening to this on audio and you don't see all of our weird faces.
You're missing out.
You're missing out. That's why people tune in. If you're watching us on the replay, thank you. Thank you to Roman Saratin, our producer. Thank you to Pam Stack, our executive producer at the Global Authors on the Air Network. This is a copywritten podcast on the Global Authors on the Air Network. Stay tuned next week at 6 p.m. on Wednesday night, Eastern Standard Time, where we will have Tori Eldridge. And if you can't get enough of me, which I find that hard to believe, tune in tomorrow at 6 p.m. I am hosting Writers Showcase, where I will be talking to a comic book superstar, Mark Russell. So until then, I'll see you guys later. Now I'm waving if you're not watching the video.